There are shows on television that give you the finished product. The glamour, the glory, the perfectly restored machine rolling out of the garage to the sound of a roaring engine and a cheering crowd. And then there is Counting Cars, from a moment it premiered on the History Channel in 2012. Danny Koker's show was never just about the vehicles. It was about the people, the grease-stained hands, the arguments over budgets, the laughter echoing off concrete floors, the brotherhood, and sometimes a betrayal that comes with building something real together. Danny Koker is not a man who talks loosely. He built his reputation in Las Vegas not on hype, but on results. Count's Kustoms became a household name because Danny demanded excellence from himself before he ever demanded it from anyone else. He grew up in Detroit, where cars aren't a hobby, they're a language. His father passed down a love for engines the same way some fathers pass down old watches or life advice. By the time Danny was a teenager, he wasn't just admiring cars from the sidewalk. He was underneath them, pulling them apart, learning how they breathed. That same dedication followed him to Las Vegas, where he built Count's Kustoms from a personal passion project into a nationally recognized brand. When Counting Cars launched as a spin-off of Pawn Stars, viewers fell in love immediately. Not because the builds were flashy, though they certainly were, but because the people felt genuine. Danny treated his crew like family, and for a long time, that family held together beautifully. But families have their fractures, and today, we're pulling back the curtain on 5 employees whose time at Count's Kustoms ended badly, quietly, or in ways that left fans stunned. Some stories involve serious crimes. Others involve creative tension, personal choices, and the brutal pressure of life under television cameras. Each one tells us something important about what it really takes to survive inside a shop where every mistake ends up on national television and every dollar is accounted for, or at least it's supposed to be. Every successful business has someone working behind the scenes who never appears in the spotlight but keeps everything moving. At Count's Kustoms, that person was Joseph Frontiera. He wasn't welding frames or laying down custom paint. He wasn't entertaining the camera or cracking jokes with the crew. Joseph worked as the company's bookkeeper, the person responsible for managing the money that kept the entire operation alive. When you hand someone the keys to your finances, you are placing an enormous amount of trust in their hands. Danny Koker had spent years building Count's Kustoms into something worth protecting. The revenue flowing through that shop wasn't just business income. It represented hundreds of hours of skilled labor, hard-won client relationships, and a reputation that had taken decades to earn. Joseph Frontiera knew all of that, and he chose to take advantage of it anyway. Over a period of time that investigators would later piece together carefully, Joseph used his position to steal more than $75,000 from Count's Kustoms. And the way he did it showed deliberate planning, rather than a moment of weakness or poor judgment. He used company funds to make a personal down payment on a Range Rover. He booked airline tickets and covered personal travel expenses using money that belonged to the shop. He wasn't borrowing it with any intention of paying it back. He was simply taking IT to TO cover his tracks. Joseph did something that crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed in the world of business or personal relationships. He forged Danny Koker's signature on documents. He created false records designed to make everything look legitimate. For a period of time, it worked. The manipulation was thorough enough that it didn't raise immediate red flags. But financial irregularities have a way of surfacing eventually, especially in a business where every build has a cost attached to it and every dollar matters. When Danny and his team discovered what had been happening, the reaction was exactly what you expect from a man who values loyalty above almost everything else: outrage, followed by decisive action. In 2016, Count's Kustoms filed a lawsuit not only against Joseph Frontiera, but also against Randstad USA, the staffing agency that had placed him in that role. The shop's legal team argued that the agency failed to conduct an adequate background check before recommending someone for a position with significant financial access and responsibility. The lawsuit made headlines in the Counting Cars community, and fans were stunned. Joseph had never been a recognizable face on the show. Most viewers had no idea who he was until his name appeared in court documents. His disappearance from any involvement with the shop had happened quietly and without any explanation on air. Now they understood why. He had walked out of Counts Customs, leaving behind a trail of forged paperwork, stolen funds, and shattered trust. What makes Joseph Frontiera's story particularly damaging is not just the financial loss, though $75,000 is significant. It's what the theft represented. Danny had created an environment where people were trusted with real responsibility. That trust was weaponized. After this, Counts Customs tightened its financial controls significantly. New oversight systems were put in place. The days of operating on informal trust alone were over. Joseph Frontiera may have never turned a wrench or touched a paint gun, but the damage he caused to the shop's culture and operations was as serious as any mechanical failure could ever be. Not every difficult departure from Counts Customs involved theft or deception. Some exits were simply the result of two very different personalities trying to occupy the same space and finding that, over time, the friction became unsustainable. Scott Jones fell into that category, and his story is one of the more complicated ones connected to the early seasons of Counting Cars. Scott came into the shop as a manager and financial overseer. His role was to keep the books balanced, ensure that projects stayed within budget, and make certain that the creative dreams Danny brought to every bill were matched by practical business reality. On paper, it sounds like a perfect complement to Danny's visionary approach. In practice, it created a constant low-grade war between two men who rarely agreed on where the line between ambition and recklessness should be drawn. From his very first appearances on the show, Scott made it clear he wasn't there to be anyone's cheerleader. He was blunt in a way that television sometimes translates as entertaining, and real life sometimes translates as exhausting. When Danny pitched a build direction that Scott thought was financially irresponsible, he said so directly, in front of the cameras, in front of the crew, and in front of millions of viewers. Some fans found that honesty refreshing. Others saw it as a man who fundamentally didn't understand the spirit of what Counts Customs was trying to do. The tension between Danny and Scott was genuine, and regular viewers could feel it. Danny operates from passion first. He sees a rustic classic sitting in someone's driveway and immediately imagines what it could become. Scott looked at the same car and saw line items, labor hours, and margin risk. Both perspectives are valid in a functioning business, but when they collide repeatedly and neither party is willing to bend very far, the working relationship begins to crack. After the second season, Scott was simply gone. No farewell episode, no dramatic confrontation shown on screen, no acknowledgement that anything had changed. Fans flooded online forums with theories. Some claimed financial misconduct was involved. Others speculated about a falling out behind the scenes that the show chose not to broadcast. The rumors took on a life of their own in the absence of any official explanation. The truth turned out to be significantly less dramatic than the speculation suggested. According to what eventually became known, Scott left Las Vegas for personal reasons, specifically to relocate to Tennessee, to be closer to family. Life decisions of that magnitude don't always come with clean narrative arcs or televised goodbyes. Sometimes people simply move on because their circumstances change and their priorities shift. Scott did not vanish in the automotive world after leaving the show. He went on to establish his own business, Koker's Extreme Automotive in Tennessee, and later appeared on Netflix's Swap Shop, a program that shares some DNA with Counting Cars and its focus on cars and collectibles. He clearly never lost his love for the industry, even if his connection to Counts Customs had run its natural course. His story belongs on this list not because he committed any wrongdoing, but because his personality and approach created enough friction during his time on the show to leave a lasting impression, not always a positive one. He was the voice that said slow down when everyone else wanted to accelerate, and that made him both necessary and difficult at the same time. The show felt different after he was gone, and whether that difference was for better or worse probably depends on which side of the budget argument you were standing on. If you were to poll longtime Counting Cars fans about which crew member they missed most after their departure, Roly Sabo's name would appear near the top of almost every list. He joined the show in its second season and worked as the shop's lead detailer through season 6. And during that time, he became something genuinely rare in reality television. A personality that felt completely authentic even under the artificial pressure of cameras and production schedules. Roly brought a quality to Counts Customs that no job description could ever capture. He had a thick Hungarian accent that made everything he said sound both funnier and more earnest than it had any right to be. His energy was constant and infectious. During long work days when the pressure of deadlines was weighing on everyone's shoulders, Roly was a person cracking a joke at exactly the right moment, doing something absurd in the background of a shot, or simply radiating the kind of warmth that makes a difficult environment feel manageable. He was genuinely liked by the crew, genuinely adored by fans, and genuinely talented at his craft. And he was talented. Detailing might not carry the same visual drama as painting a custom mural or fabricating a metal frame from scratch, but it is the final statement a car makes before it meets the world. Roly understood that. He treated every car that came under his attention as though its appearance reflected directly on his personal reputation, because in a sense, it did. Whether it was a rare classic muscle car or a fully customized chopper, Roly made sure every surface was immaculate, every reflection was perfect, and every detail was worthy of the build it finished. By the time the show reached its 4th and 5th seasons, Roly was one of the defining faces of counting cars. Viewers followed him on social media, shared clips of his funniest moments, and talked about him the way fans talk about characters they've genuinely grown attached to. He was irreplaceable in an emotional sense, the kind of presence that, once removed, leaves a gap that no direct replacement can fill. Then, in 2017, everything changed. Reports began circulating that a significant amount of detailing equipment had gone missing from Kustoms. The missing gear was not a minor inconvenience. It was thousands of dollars worth of professional-grade tools and supplies that formed the backbone of the shop's finishing operation. Shortly after the equipment disappeared, so did Roly. He was not given an on-screen exit. There was no goodbye episode, no tearful farewell, no moment of closure for fans who had spent years watching him work. One week, he was part of the crew. The next, his name was simply absent from the credits, and his face was gone from the garage. The silence in production was deafening, and in that silence, speculation filled every available space. The connection between the missing equipment and Roly's departure was never officially confirmed by Kustoms. No formal statement was ever issued, but the timing was impossible to ignore, and those close to the situation allowed the implication to speak for itself. For fans who had loved him unreservedly, the possibility that he had been involved in the theft was genuinely heartbreaking. For others, it was a reminder that television shows present edited versions of people, not the complete picture that Roly's life after counting cars tells its own story. He remained in Las Vegas and opened his own operation, Rock and Roly Custom Detailing, which developed a loyal following among car enthusiasts in the area. He continued doing exactly what he had always done, bringing the same meticulous attention to detail and the same evident pride in his work that had made him a fan favorite on the show. Whatever the full truth of his departure may be, his skills were never in question. His integrity, unfortunately, was. Not every story of someone leaving Kustoms is defined by betrayal or conflict. Shannon Aikau's departure from counting cars represents something different. A principled exit made by a man who understood who he was and refused to become someone else for the sake of television ratings. Shannon was a lead motorcycle builder at Kustoms throughout the earlier seasons of the show, and within that role, he was something close to extraordinary. He didn't have a theatrical personality. He didn't compete for screen time or manufacture moments of drama to keep producers happy. What Shannon had was skill of the rarest kind, the ability to take raw materials and transform them into motorcycles that were simultaneously functional machines and genuine works of art. Every bike that came out of Shannon's hands carried his signature in the truest sense. The lines were deliberate and considered. The welds were clean and precise. The finished product always reflected a deep understanding not just of how motorcycles work mechanically, but what they can mean aesthetically and emotionally to the person who will ride them. He built choppers with soul. He constructed tribute bikes with reverence. He approached every project with the same quiet intensity, and the results consistently spoke for themselves in the loudest possible way. His presence on the show served an important function beyond the technical. In an environment full of outsized personalities, people who were funny, confrontational, theatrical, or simply very loud, Shannon provided balance. He was the still point in a turning world. Watching him work was almost meditative. While others were talking about what a build could be, Shannon was already making it happen with his hands. Fans respected that quality enormously, even if they sometimes overlooked it in favor of the louder moments happening around him as Counting Cars evolved through its later seasons. The creative direction of the show shifted noticeably. The production leaned harder into interpersonal drama, engineered tension, and storylines designed to generate emotional reactions from viewers. That approach is understandable from a ratings perspective. It's a formula that works in reality television, but it fundamentally changed the texture of what the show was. The ratio of craft to conflict shifted in a direction that prioritized entertainment value over authentic documentation of skilled work. For Shannon, that shift was incompatible with his reasons for being there. He hadn't signed on to be a character in someone else's drama. He had signed on to build exceptional motorcycles. When the show's priorities moved away from that purpose, Shannon found himself increasingly displaced, not because he lacked talent, but because his talent operated in a register that the new direction of the show wasn't amplifying the way it once had. His response was characteristically quiet. He didn't issue a public statement. He didn't air grievances on social media or grant interviews designed to damage the show's reputation. He simply reduced his involvement gradually, allowed his screen time to diminish naturally, and eventually stepped away entirely without making production of the exit. It was entirely consistent with how he had always operated, letting his actions do the speaking, keeping the noise to a minimum. Shannon Aikau never stopped building motorcycles. He remained active in the Las Vegas custom motorcycle community, continuing to create bikes with the same level of care and craftsmanship that had defined his work on the show. His reputation among serious motorcycle enthusiasts was never damaged by his departure from counting cars, because that reputation was never built on television exposure to begin with. It was built on quality, and quality doesn't disappear when the cameras stop rolling. His story is, in many ways, the most instructive one on this list. Fame is seductive, and the temptation to adapt yourself to what the spotlight demands can be overwhelming. Shannon looked at that temptation clearly and chose his craft instead. That decision cost him visibility but preserved something more valuable: the integrity of his work and the clarity of his identity. Counting cars lost something genuine when Shannon stepped away. The show went on, but there was a quiet excellence missing from it that no amount of manufactured drama could replace. And then there's Mike Henry. Known to virtually everyone who watched Counting Cars as Horny Mike, he was the show's most visually arresting personality. A man who wore horn helmets and wild mohawks and existed in a state of perpetual creative combustion that made every scene he appeared in immediately more energetic. But reducing Mike to a collection of visual quirks would be a serious misunderstanding of who he actually was and what he actually brought to Count's Kustoms. Mike was a lead airbrush artist at the shop, and his job was to provide the final, most personal layer of expression on vehicles that had already been through extensive mechanical and structural transformation. Airbrush artistry at the highest level is not decoration. It is storytelling. It requires technical control, so precise that the difference between a masterpiece and a mediocre finish can be measured in the pressure applied to a trigger. It requires an eye for color, composition, and visual narrative that bridges the gap between fine art and industrial craft. Mike had all of those things, and he brought them to every project with a commitment that often extended his workdays well beyond what production schedules suggested was necessary. His background before Count's Kustoms included custom paint and three-dimensional sculpting, giving him a creative vocabulary that went significantly deeper than most people working in automotive finishing. When Danny Koker first brought him into the shop, there was genuine creative electricity between them. Danny recognized that Mike's abilities could elevate the shop's reputation, and for a considerable stretch of time, that recognition produced remarkable results. The designs Mike created were genuinely unforgettable: flame effects with depth and movement, skull imagery with personality and precision, metallic fades that seemed to change character depending on the angle of the light. The partnership worked because it was built on mutual respect for the work. Both men cared intensely about the finished product. Both had very strong opinions about what the finished product should look like. And for a while, those strong opinions pushed each other in productive directions rather than destructive ones. But the dynamics inside a television production are not the same as the dynamics inside an independent custom shop. TV has schedules that don't negotiate with inspiration. A project an artist might want to sit with for another 2 days to get exactly right has to be completed by Thursday, because that's when the camera crew is scheduled to film the reveal. That kind of pressure is antithetical to the way genuine creative work actually functions, and Mike felt it acutely. Beyond the time pressure, the creative clash between Mike and Danny began to escalate as the show developed. Mike's instincts ran toward the bold, the experimental, and the boundary pushing. Danny's responsibilities as shop owner required him to maintain a consistent brand identity that clients could rely on. These are not irreconcilable positions, but they require ongoing conversation and compromise. And when the cameras are rolling and both parties are under pressure, those conversations don't always stay productive. There was never a public explosion, no moment that defined the end of Mike's full involvement with the show in a clean and dramatic way. Instead, like Shannon Aikau before him, Mike's presence gradually diminished. His appearances became less frequent. His role in the featured builds became smaller. And eventually, the creative force who had once been one of the most recognizable elements of Counting Cars was channeling his energy primarily elsewhere. That elsewhere turned out to be Horny Mike Designs, his own brand and business that allowed him to work on his own terms, accept the projects that genuinely excited him, and deliver finished art on timelines that served the work rather than the production schedule. He continued making appearances at car shows and fan events, remained active in the custom design community, and maintained a relationship with Count's Kustoms that had moved past regular employment into something more informal and occasional. That Mike's story is the most nuanced one on this list, because it isn't really a failure story at all. It's a story about the fundamental tension between commerce and creativity and what happens when an artist inside a commercial environment reaches the limit of how much compromise he can accept without losing something essential about himself. He gave Counting Cars some of its most memorable visual moments. His work helped define the shop's aesthetic identity during the show's peak years. And when his path diverged from the show's direction, he